Okay, sorry about that. We're back up and running. Where I left off was you were saying something about the Russians showing video game footage or something. Is that
Yeah. So sort of talking about, when you tell a blatant lie just to show that you can. I think that's not necessarily what that is achieving. I think there is certain propaganda that's not designed to convince anyone that already isn't on your side, but is meant to reassure and re-entrench people that already believe you. So, for
right?
example, Russia has shown footage of video games as evidence of them sometimes like having military victories in Ukraine. And I think on a certain level you think, oh, well, why would they show this? Don't they know it's going to get immediately debunked? But they don't care about that because the people that they were targeting with that are the people that aren't going to be around for the debunk. They're the kind of people who are going to see, oh, Russia. They're going to be like, oh, Russia destroyed that unit. Let me incorporate that into my head and then move on with my day and never revisit it. And so I think there's a real sometimes targeting of propaganda that's not meant to change minds, but just re-entrench and reinforce existing ideas. And if that's the case, then you really don't have to sometimes be worried about, well, is this a lie? How much is this going to come back and bite me in my ass? If you're already, if your only target is people that are already heavily entrenched into your worldview.
Yeah. So the way you describe that is exactly the way I perceive religious apologetics a lot of the time, right? Like, if you've ever had these debates about religion, there's all these, for whatever religion it is that you're debating about, they're going to have a bunch of like apologetic arguments for why you're supposed to believe in it. But I think I perceive those arguments as not being very effective in converting non-believers, but being like pretty effective at defending, at
Mm-hmm.
giving believers reasons to not listen to the other side.
Example, suppose the president of the United States tells you that the election is stolen. The president of the United States is an authority figure. Authority is the basis for the trust required for a healthy communication environment. When a major authority figure is telling you something, and that's the authority figure that you trust the most, then you're going to believe it, not because you have any other evidence that the election was stolen, but because someone in a position of great authority has told you that.
Now, that sounds really important. Somebody in a position of great authority has reinforced the idea, because one thing you notice in this information environment is efforts all over the place to ridicule and destroy expertise, ridicule and destroy authority. You even see it in public health. Tony Fauci doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a criminal. He's a fascist. Things like that. There's a lot of, it seems to me, efforts to destroy other locations of authority.
Yeah, authoritarianism is all about destroying every location of authority except the leaders. Science is an enormous to an authoritarian leader. But the kind of fascist authoritarianism, far-right cult of the leader authoritarianism, where it's all about what this guy says, that kind of authoritarianism is deeply threatened by science. It's deeply threatened by reality, and science is the descriptor of reality. Authoritarianism is all about replacing epistemic authority, that is scientific authority, authority based on knowledge, by charismatic authority that is based on a person.
What are the best conditions then for propaganda? It sounds like, from what you're describing.
I really like the way he put that, like replacing epistemic authority with charismatic authority. But also, I'm reminded a lot of when we watched the documentary about Putin, right? And
Yeah.
one of the things that we were talking about was how like a Jeff Bezos style person couldn't, as much as people will talk about rich oligarchs in Russia and try to compare them to rich American billionaires, somebody with a private empire really couldn't exist in Russia, because just
Yeah.
the fact that it is any kind of separate power structure kind of threatens the ability of the regime to have in some sphere of its control, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's
100%.
a similar concept to what they're talking about here with regimes that want to have like media control. They're kind of their ability to exercise that control absolutely is threatened by any source of information that they are not directly controlling.
Yeah, it's very similar to actually the origins of the German healthcare system. I believe I might be getting this historical detail wrong, but I believe it was the case that these insurance pooled funds started among factory workers in Prussia on their own, and the government incorporated them because they didn't want that to exist outside of their control. They wanted to incorporate it and have their sort of hands on the levers. And I think you see, I think it's really interesting is the difference in when they try to sort of just subsume a power structure into their own to eliminate it, an alternative power structure, versus destroy it. You could argue that in a lot of ways, Trump's takeover of the Republican Party was sort of that subsumement because, he didn't think that or maybe just didn't want to run as a third party, right? That's sort of like a difference there in terms of letting the Republican Party do their own thing, just overtaking them and becoming the new dominant party, or trying to sort of work within and take over that power structure. And I think you're still sort of seeing that conflict play out now. And I think one of the more interesting questions is, and this is sometimes a possibility that gets floated, is what happens if Trump were to not get the nomination for the Republican Party, and would he run as a third party? Would he start his own party and start running for it? And what would that do to American politics? I don't know if that's likely, or it certainly doesn't seem likely at the very least. But
he did it before. He
yeah,
ran third party in 2000.
Yeah, as the Ross Perot's, I think it was called the Progress Party or the Forward Party or something like that.
Reform Party.
Yeah, the Reform Party. Yeah, and that certainly doesn't seem likely. But man, it doesn't seem like it's a 0% chance, right? Like
Yeah.
at this point, Trump is very unpredictable. And man, if there's anything the 2016 election told us, it's to not be overly confident of established political norms. I mean, that seems like a crazy possibility, but when you really think about it, it doesn't seem that unlikely. So trying to evaluate, is that going to happen and what would that look like if it did happen, I think is a really interesting and important question.
Describing a feeling of threat, a feeling of enemies at the gates, a feeling of losing something that's dear to you, whether it's your social status, your race. So what sets the conditions to make propaganda the most effective? What about us makes it the most fertile?
You can create the conditions, and good propagandists create the conditions. So the anti-CRT moral panic was sort of parasitic, what happened in the schools with COVID. Parents were very upset and very anxious and angry at public schools. Critical race theory had nothing to do with the reason that they were upset. Was a way to mobilize them against a phantom target. The conditions don't have to be at all related to the target of propaganda. Germany was the least anti-Semitic European country in 1931 and the most anti-Semitic by 1939. So you can create the conditions yourself, and a good propagandist knows that. So you can't take anything they say or do as at face value. If they presuppose something, however innocuous, you must reject it, not just reject it, but forcibly reject it, because the only reason they want to believe it is to destroy you and your way of life.
That is sort of true, I think, in the most brutal senses of like populism or fascism, right? The idea of like the body politic and defining it in like opposition. This is sort of like, I don't know how familiar you are with Schmidt. I'm not gonna remember his first name, but he was like I think his official title was like the crown jurist of the Third Reich. Basically, he was like the supreme legal authority. And his philosophy is sort of the underpinnings, I think, of a lot of fascist thought, and talking about the idea of like, oh, you need a defined enemy that the body politic is in opposition to. That being said, I don't know how true this is of American populism, at least at current. It doesn't feel like, I think that the phenomenon of populism in America is a lot more explainable by the failure of our institutions in the 2000s, which were very real, and the sort of media landscape that we live in. I don't think it's the case that this maybe this is true for someone like Steve Bannon, right? Or Nick Fuentes, or someone that is very much an ideological thinker and like a true hard-boned like populist or reactionary, who's very much thinking in terms of like how do we motivate this movement, trying to almost be like a thought leader. But I don't think like the average rank and file Republican, I don't think even someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene would be like, oh, it's about defining our enemies in total opposition to us. I don't think that is currently, at the very least, fingers crossed it stays that way, accurate to the populist movement in America. I think he's sort of overstepping it a bit there.
This reminds me of a conversation I had. I think I might have mentioned this on stream to you before. A conversation I had one time with a friend of mine who is a fan of Watchmen, which I haven't actually read the graphic novel or seen the movie or anything. But
That's all a Zack Snyder movie. I mean, what's the difference?
Oh, okay. Anyway, what I'm told about it was.
Sorry, I was going to say that's a joke. I think the Zack Snyder movie is like almost legendary for how much the Watchmen fans hated it for like being very different about a lot of different things. I just want to clarify. I am not saying that as if I actually have knowledge of the comic. I'm just being an idiot.
Okay. Anyway, the concept I was trying to invoke here, this is just what I'm told about it, was that this story. I guess the idea is that humanity could be united by having a common enemy or something like that, right? And so the idea was that I guess maybe one of the characters kind of like manufactures an alien invasion or something like that, so that the humans can unite against them.
Specifically, it's the Cold War. The character, big Watchmen spoilers by the way, but basically the main villain, Ozymandias, creates like these like psychic squid monsters, and then sets them up to appear as if they are invading from outer space to force the Soviet Union, the United States of America, to come together to fend them off, because he's convinced that otherwise, it's only a matter of time until we keep rolling the dice on nuclear Armageddon and we get Snake Eyes.
Yeah, and so anyway, that was a conversation I had with this friend before COVID, right? And then we had another interesting conversation after COVID came along, because it seemed like, a somewhat of a real life equivalent to that had materialized, right? Like this is an enemy that theoretically humanity could have united against, but it seemed to have had the opposite effect.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors that go into whether or not you're going to unite against something. And that, I guess the question is, if you run, the Earth simulator 100 times, is it 90 times we all, descended to partisan tribalism, or is it like 5 times? That's the real question that's really difficult to answer. Maybe it's the case that, in order to unite against something, it needs to be something you can really hate. It's kind of hard to hate like a microscopic virus you can't see, as opposed to like a much more tangible thing. Maybe it's the case that, it's just about who defines the media cycle in, the first week, how does that play out? Maybe those are true, or maybe they're just total bullshit that I just came up with that sound like they might be true, but actually aren't borne out if you actually run the simulation. The trouble is we can't run the simulation, so it's really hard to answer those kinds of questions.
Up next, we go inside the churches where the fire and brimstone sounds a whole lot like QAnon. We're with the evangelical pastors pushing conservative America into some troubling territory.
I've told you the whole time this election was fraudulent. We got so much proof. The only people that can deny it are crack-smoking, demon-possessed leftists.
I think I met that guy on a Prime panel once.
I love how animated they are.
Welcome back to Breaking the Vote. I'm Todd Zwillich. The church has been one of the centers of political life for generations, especially for Republicans. And the evangelical church specifically, fair or not, has become almost synonymous with the word Republican. In fact, while the number of those identifying as secular in the United States has reached its highest level in history, within the evangelical movement, followers are entrenching themselves even more. One major study found that there was, quote, no mass departure of white Americans from evangelical Protestantism from 2016 to 2020. That's astounding, and yet maybe not that surprising, given who was president at the time. The evangelical church has been the home of the Republican Party base for years, but now it's pulling it in a new, some might say dangerous direction, where some pastors are preaching a tainted, conspiratorial worldview, melding religion and politics in new ways. Vegas Tenold takes us inside one church that sounds like it's espousing more QAnon than Holy Scripture.
Evangelicals have been a powerful force in GOP politics for years. But faced with a changing nation, the church is finding itself older and whiter than the rest of the country. Fearing diminished influence, many pastors are grasping for answers and finding them in conspiracy theories.
People like, do you honestly believe that the military uncovered tunnels beneath the Capitol building and beneath the White House and in the Five-Fingered Lakes? Do you really believe that they found kids? Yeah, both live ones and dead ones. And if you try to keep that on the DL, you're just as complicit as Hunter Biden and the rest of them bunch of crack-smoking perverts.
Wow. Locke is a masterful preacher.
Bruce Grenzer is a former evangelical pastor turned atheist who lives in rural Ohio. He says that the spread of conspiracy theories like QAnon in the evangelical church has been a long time coming.
There was this increasing adoption of white nationalistic thinking, starting with Jerry Falwell and Paul Weyrich back in the late 70s with the moral majority, for example. And so they birthed this baby that when Trump it came of age, they realized that the way to power was through politics. I was in one church.
I don't know if it's fair to say that the moral majority. I mean, I guess to be fair, this is something I don't know as much about. It was very much before my time, the moral majority, and like the birth of sort of the neoconservative movement with Reagan in the 80s and stuff, as sort of a counter-reaction to the post-war consensus. But I think people like that would very much disagree with this assertion. I mean, of course they disagree. That's a meaningless point. But I don't think it's very accurate. It felt like that view was very much compatible with more of like a civic nationalist approach, where they're like, the thing that makes us Americans is not that we're white, but that we believe in like the Constitution and freedom of speech and like capitalism and things like that. Whereas it feels like, and no doubt there's perhaps an undercurrent to that, right? In the same way, I think it's fair to say, there's like an undercurrent of like anti-Semitism and like more like far left spaces. But I don't know if it's fair to say that it is that thing in and of itself. I don't know. Maybe I would have to like go and look into some more of these like old school pastors. Like I think it's like Billy Graham is like one of the OG ones. This whole sort of wave of like the 80s of like this sort of almost like I think like a religious sort of reawakening almost. I think it's not the Great Awakening because that's like way back in the day.
Yeah,
but I think that there's some I think there's actually literally a specific term for that like evangelical sort of like uproar in the 80s. I can't remember off the top of my head though.
Yeah, I don't remember the term either. You said something that I had trouble following what you meant by it. Like when you said something like. You were talking about the relationship of civic nationalism to the evangelical movement, and then you said, like, I don't know if it is that thing. Like, can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, I don't think sort of when he's talking about the moral majority sort of being sort of the seeds for white nationalism, I don't think that's fair to say, because I think those ideas of the moral majority were much more in line with civic nationalism, which is the idea that like, the things that unite us is not our country should not be defined by an identity of race, but it should be defined by an identity of civics. So like this would be the case that like, we should have immigrants integrate, but it's totally fine for plenty of non-white immigrants to come here because they're just then going to become Americans. They're going to believe in like capitalism and stuff like that. Like I think like I honestly believe if you read the mind of like Ronald Reagan or George Bush Sr., they would be thinking things like, I'm totally fine with like Mexicans or black people moving to America. I just want them to be red-blooded Americans. I want them to be, conservatives that believe in the nuclear family and, are faithful before God and things like this. I think it's sort of almost harkens back to one of the old school Republican strategies on Hispanics, most successfully employed by George W. Bush, which was the idea that, man, a lot of Hispanic communities, particularly Tejanos in like Texas, more old school Hispanic communities, or Cuban exiles in Florida, these people are the ideal conservative voter in a lot of respects. They have strong families, very religious, live in rural areas, don't like, a lot of the more, liberal nonsense that goes on in cities. And there was a big push to sort of try and turn those people into the new base of the conservative movement that failed previously, but now you're starting to see some more movement on in like the 2020 election, for example, where, for example, like, rural people in Texas, whether they are white or Hispanic, are not the biggest fan of like, teaching, gender theory in like schools. Whether or not we think that's an overblown issue or not, the reality is most rural Texans don't like that, including the substantial rural Texas communities that are not white.
I think I halfway agree with your description of all this and halfway disagree, because the way I see the conservative movement over the last several decades was that it's kind of like an uneasy alliance between a lot of different factions. And so I would say for half the conservative movement, it might be true that it's totally compatible with a civic nationalism that just totally rejects racism and so on, right? But the thing is, like, this was all happening in the wake of in the aftermath of the political realignment that occurred in the 1960s, when the majority of Southern white evangelicals migrated from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party in reaction against desegregation. So this was, famously exploited by Richard Nixon with the Southern strategy and all of that. But I think it essentially what was happening with a lot of these people. So I think you're right to describe like a Ronald Reagan or a George H.W. Bush or whatever. These are much more like civic nationalist people. If they're racist, then they're certainly not the kind of racists who are like super ideologically committed to it.
They're definitely not like the people that you're describing that are very real, sort of the remnants of the Dixiecrats that sort of just moved around to sort of form their new, to sort of adjust to the new political reality, especially because those people tried and failed to do it on their own. Oh God, I can't remember which elections it is, but there's some U.S. presidential elections where I think it's the South basically gets completely screwed over because half of their votes are for the Dixiecrats who formed their own party. I think it's George Bull Turner, I think it is, the guy that says segregation now, segregation forever. That is their literal presidential nominee. I'm just going to double check.
I want to say this is maybe 1964 or 68, one of those.
No, let me see here. Yeah, Strom Thurmond. This is it. Yes. This guy served in for the presidential election.
Yeah, this guy, by the way, after this, went on to be a long-serving Republican senator for several decades after being a segregationist presidential candidate. But
yeah, for the states' rights. Wow. Okay, that party flag de facto. Okay, yeah, this is we found it. Yeah.
Right. So like like a Reagan or a George H.W. Bush, even though they're not really part of that cultural movement, they were definitely trying to harness that cultural movement to their benefit. They were purposely building a coalition to allow those kind of people to be comfortable in it.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was as early as the 1948 election, but yeah, you can see here in the map, you can see there's sort of like the sort of the traditional South, like for the states that seceded in the Confederacy, sort of the Bible Belt. There's a real splitting here of the states between Thurman and Truman. I mean, I think Truman ends up winning anyways, handily, just from a poor performance from Dewey. But yeah, it's a really there's a lot of not so good things going on in these states when it comes to the opinion of black people. So that's definitely fair.
Yeah.
In Southeast Ohio for 11 years. I preached a certain viewpoint. It was certainly we were a Christian nation.
Bruce preached fundamental evangelicalism and conservative values for almost 3 decades. But by the late 1990s, his religious and political beliefs had softened and eventually left him completely. But even though he moved away from the church, conspiracy theories still found a way to his family.
None of them are evangelicals, except for my third oldest son. Great kid, but was very non-political his whole life, never voted. And then in January of 2020, something changed. He has gone to a Southern Baptist church. He's told me that my pastor believes a lot of the same things I believe. He sees this otherworldly element working within the government now. When Biden got elected, all of a sudden, Satan was sitting in the Oval Office.
Do you feel like your son has been led astray?
It's hard to sit by when someone espouses those things and there's really nothing you can do about it.
Bruce's son didn't want to be interviewed and didn't respond to our emails. They don't see each other as much as they used to.
I want to hope that there's going to come a point where he wakes up one day and says, this is not the path I want to be on, but my fear is he's going to become more deeply involved in these things. He's not only an awesome son, but he's the father to my grandchildren, and they mean the world to me.
Is ever going to see that? You better know that America may fall one day, but it will not fall to Joe Biden. It will not fall to Nancy Pelosi. It sure ain't gonna fall to Cuomo. He's out. Can I get a witness right there?
Ludicrousness aside, the genius and insidiousness of Q is that anyone can be a part of it, and you don't even need to call yourself a believer. People can regurgitate Q tropes until the cows come home while still claiming, with a straight face, that they have no idea
exactly
what QAnon
what
is.
you were saying
Even
earlier.
Trump did that.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know much about the movement other than I understand they like me very much, which I appreciate.
He's up there right now. He's talking about Joe Biden. He's talking about Nancy Pelosi. Now he says he's not hearing it, but if it walks like a duck,
But you gotta add some subtitles for this part, brother.
People call me a QAnon conspiracy. I ain't no Q, okay? I'm not in all that nonsense. I'm a truth seeker and a truth teller. And I'm very calculated with what I say. And so I'm very aware, very self-aware. I don't say things.
And this is what makes it really difficult, is when there are people who absolutely are into QAnon that will say this, then it's really difficult to sort out, okay, well, who is spouting QAnon ideas because those ideas have just filtered down to them, versus who is spouting those ideas because they actually are, and they're just never going to own up to it. That's where it becomes really, really tricky.
That I couldn't fight for if they sued me. I say things that I have verifiable evidence or eyewitness testimony or pictures or a background and a narrative to. I'm a little smarter than a lot of people give me credit for.
So you have evidence of Biden being a pedophile and Kamala Harris being...
I can promise you, if I
possessed.
say it from that platform, just like when I said Tom Hanks is a pedophile, it does not matter to me if people say Tom Hanks is going to sue you. I wish he would.
Why don't you show us the evidence?
I don't have to show you the evidence. I will
that
when
didn't
time
work out
comes.
so well
So
for
you
Alex
must
Jones.
also know that this is exactly what QAnon says as well, right?
It doesn't matter to me what QAnon says. Everybody wants to paint you in a corner and say that you're a conspiracy theorist. The problem is the only difference between truth and conspiracy lately has been about 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Because now we need some new ones because they all happen to be coming to pass.
Do you believe that the left is evil?
Absolutely. 1,000%.
Anyone involved?
Anybody that believes what the left believes is absolutely on the side of evil.
And you say that to your congregation?
Absolutely.
Does it not concern you that when you're telling people that a large group of people are evil, that they might take it upon themselves to act on
Well,
those
two
words?
things. Number one, Jesus did the same thing. And number two, there's no seatbelts in that tent. They can leave anytime they want to. Nobody's keeping them there.
What is keeping them there is that Locke is not only validating extreme ideas, he's anointing them, giving them biblical truth. Could it be that you're wrong?
No. Absolutely not. Not in this issue. Now, have I been wrong before about things? Yeah. Have I apologized? Yes. But in these massive issues, to me, they're like fundamental staples. And there's no way I'm wrong about them.
But I just didn't tell you something.
When we come back, the evolution of propaganda from word-of-mouth conjecture and tidbits in daily periodicals, and the for and against war billboards and posters during World War II, to the full-blown cable news disinformation of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, to TikTok, Reddit, and more. Alexis Johnson joins to tell us how we arrived at this current iteration of propaganda that's putting many in harm's way and democracy in the crosshairs. Propaganda used to be a tool of the elites, but now it's well within all our reach, which might not be a good thing. Here's Alexis Johnson.
The term propaganda has got kind of an old school ring to it. It makes you think of war posters, secret spy transmissions, and general mayhem. But propaganda has actually evolved, and is still steering our country today. In the 1940s, Edward Bernays, the so-called father of public relations, wrote about the expansion of communication technology, saying, quote, "The United States has become a small room in which a single whisper is magnified thousands of times." And for anyone who's ever had a tweet go uncomfortably viral, that last line hit a little too hard. Pretty much all of the ideas about communication and propaganda that Bernays laid out are still very relevant. In the same essay, he called this communication network a potent force for social good or possible evil. And it sure seems like now it's being used mostly for evil.
The fake news, they want you to be discouraged.
There has been something that has been going on in terms of trafficking over the border to change demographics of this country for a long time.
I'm going to call out every single hospital, and they're going to have to answer for why they are chopping off the genitals and the breasts of healthy kids.
We've basically been trying to manipulate each other since people started communicating. Initially, propaganda was a tool only used by the powerful to control the masses of regular people. Tales of brave, strong soldiers helped motivate troops during ancient wars. Government and religious leaders were said to be descended from gods to cement their power. All propaganda. And with the dawn of methods of mass communication, it became even easier to spread these messages and to hit people over the head with them. During the Civil War, both Union and Southern states used propaganda. Even letters came wrapped in political messaging. When you imagine Santa Claus, you're probably thinking of a piece of Civil War propaganda. This drawing of Santa handing out gifts to Union soldiers became the blueprint that modern Santa drawings were based on. The war's end brought about a whole new crop of evil propaganda in the Reconstruction South. Jim Crow spread and was popularized in newspaper stories, drawings, and even the country's first big blockbuster movie, Birth of a Nation. And racist Southerners weren't the only ones to clock the power of film as propaganda. During World War II, the Nazis were infamous for their propaganda machine. Hitler employed skilled filmmakers to make movies glorifying the Third Reich and the Aryan race, and to spread lies about Jews. Political messaging became even more unavoidable as people brought TVs
I wish
into
they'd
their
mentioned
homes.
Birth of a Nation, which was a lot of the big inspiration for that.
I thought they did earlier, but maybe I was incorrect about the movie they were talking about in the South.
Wait, did
Yeah,
they?
no, yeah.
Oh no, never mind. I'm sorry, they did. I just like I thought that was something different. Yeah. So Birth of a Nation, by the way, in case you guys don't know, was an extremely historically important movie that was kind of like lionizing the KKK, and it was like a piece of racist propaganda, and like Woodrow Wilson was a fan of it.
Yeah. He showed it in the White House, and I think he called it like I can't remember the exact quote, but he had some positive remark about it that said that wasn't just he said it was a good movie, but he talked about how that was that is how it happened. That's a very truthful adaptation of what really went down.
And that was a big part of what inspired a lot of these later like Nazi propaganda filmmakers. Like Hitler was, publicly said a few times that parts of his movement were inspired by kind of like American racist ideology.
100 million people tuned in to watch the made-for-TV movie The Day After, which showed an end-time situation where the Cold War finally became hot and nuclear bombs rained across the country. Then after 9/11, we were served a steady diet of freedom fries, America's mayor, American flag lapel pins, WMDs, and God bless the USA. It's no wonder that when we invaded Iraq, most Americans were totally down with it, thanks to propaganda, of course.
Well, now the word propaganda is starting to do a lot of work for you, because where do you draw the line between, I think that, there are a lot of Americans who were alive in 2001, 2002 that had some pretty legitimate grievances, given the state of affairs. How much of that is manufactured propaganda versus how much is that also cynical appealing to what the American people want to see? I mean, is it really the case that all of this stuff is top down being fed to Americans, or is it the case that there's a fair amount of this that's like, man, people really are motivated about patriotism right now, I'm gonna go put some American flags in my movie, right? Like it's a really fine line to draw. There's specific cases where we can say 100% one way, 100% the other way. When it comes to the cases in the middle and trying to draw out that line, that's a really difficult thing to say. Well, this isn't grassroots because it was rich people specifically with resources trying to direct this message to a lot of other people, which in of itself kind of discounts, do we arbitrarily draw a line around the wishes of rich people trying to influence others versus, normal conversation among poor middle class people? I mean, that's a whole conversation in of itself as well. But then even more difficult is the actual question of where we draw the line between that and a same rich person being like, man, the people who buy my product are really into patriotism right now because 3,000 Americans just got killed by a fucking giant plane ramming into like one of the most recognizable and famous buildings in the New York City skyline. So I'm gonna make my thing more patriotic. Listen, George Bush, not good. What the hell, George Bush? Not cool, man. Lying about WMDs in Iraq, obviously. But when it comes to the issue as to why Americans were drummed up for support, and also for Afghanistan, I mean, we're not even getting to that, where there absolutely was a case where, we're going to the Taliban in Afghanistan being like, where's Osama bin Laden? They're like, okay, we do have Osama bin Laden, but we will not give him to you. We'll do our own trial. And it's like, oh, that's not acceptable to us. We're going to intervene here. Yeah, it's there is a lot more to this issue than I think she's getting into. I'm hoping they're not just going to brush over this because this is the difficult question with propaganda: is where do you draw the line, right? She talked earlier about how in olden times, countries would sometimes lionize their own warriors as propaganda to justify their wars. And that's no doubt true. But you know what's also probably true? That the people in a country want to believe that their soldiers, many of whom they're going to know, have personal relationships, are good people. That their nation, which they are a part of, is good. That they're doing a good thing. So where does, and then the real question is if you engage in if you are lying to yourself, in a sense, right? If you're being like, oh, this is nice to believe, so I want to believe it and incorporate that, is that propaganda in the traditional sense? Or is that just you convincing yourself? And how do we sort out, very deliberate efforts to spread a lie, like George Bush talking about WMDs, versus people just wanting to believe in this thing? Because it would be so good if we're the good guys, right? Everyone wants to be the good people in their story, right?
Doesn't it almost have to be the overlap of the two? Because that kind of public messaging can really only work if there's a public that's receptive to it, right?
I think, there has to be a confluence of factors. It's not just the case that you can just snap your fingers and propagandize whatever you want. A lot of times this will be playing on things that the people already want to believe or like to believe. Sometimes it feels like the way that people, especially left-leaning people, sometimes talk about this stuff. I don't know if you've ever had manufacturing consent brought out against you in an argument, but It's like the elites of this country are a diverse set of people with different incentives, and yes, they have the resources that allow them to do certain things, but it's not like they could just, all right, what's on the agenda? Well, tomorrow we're going to make sure that Americans want to rape babies. Oh, yes, that's going to be the agenda. We're going to, there are limits to what they can do, what they can influence, and it's really sometimes difficult to sort out genuine, uses of their influence, right? If Bill Gates takes out, a full 2-page ad in the New York Times that says climate change is a really big deal, is that propaganda?
Well, I think it is, but I think we kind of think of propaganda as this morally loaded word that we use it to insinuate that something bad is going on. But I think propaganda doesn't have to be negative. It could just be any kind of public messaging that with some kind of political, cultural, or commercial agenda. It's really not any different from propaganda.
When people use the word propaganda, it's so loaded, right? If we want that to be the definition of propaganda, that's fine, but the problem is there's a disagreement, right? I feel like a lot of people would say, oh, well, propaganda has to be false or not true. And well, now that, and if that's the case, well, then what is it propaganda is going to start falling along political lines, right? Is it, right? It's not propaganda to say the election was stolen. It was actually stolen. It is absolutely propaganda to say the election was stolen because it wasn't, right? And yeah, it's just, there is so much more to this conversation than what this initial. I guess to be fair, I'm dumping all of my arguments, and maybe she's about to say in the next 5 seconds. Of course, it's very nuanced. We'll probably be like, oh, I'm such a dumbass, but I don't think they're gonna do that. I'm gonna be honest. I don't have a lot of faith in Vice here.
They'll probably give a 1-sentence lip service to all of what you just said. That's what I'm expecting.
All right, let's see.
But even as recent as the 2000s, you had to be someone with a huge audience to get a message like that out. Now, anyone can be a master propagandist. Can you slap some big white text over a picture of a politician that you don't like and hit tweet? Can you film a 15-second rant against someone you're not a fan of and post it on TikTok?
Hi, my name is Ketanji Brown Jackson. I gave pedophiles lighter sentences because I'm black. All black people should vote for me, or if you don't vote for me, you're a racist.
Well, congratulations. You've joined the long history of propaganda. Now the messaging isn't coming just from the powerful to control the general population. It's being created by everyone. Even the smallest Truth Social account can get an audience whipped up into a frenzy with a well-timed post. A single tweet can start a massive misinformation wave on COVID, election fraud conspiracies, and more. In the 21st century, we're now feeling exactly how democratized propaganda has become, just in time for it to possibly undo our entire democratic system.
He helped call the state of Arizona for Biden on election night in 2020. That accurate call touched off a firestorm from enraged Fox News viewers. And right after that, he was fired from his job, only to find himself testifying before the January 6th committee months later. Former Fox political editor Chris Steiwalt joins me to talk about the problems plaguing cable news, how it's hammering away at the foundations of American democracy, and what we can do to stop it. This is Breaking the Vote. It was election night 2020, and the first major news outlet called the key state of Arizona for Joe Biden.
This is a big development. Yeah. The Fox News Decision Desk is calling Arizona for Joe Biden. That is a big get.
We now know it was the former president's favorite network, Fox News, that made that dramatic call. And it was a stunning early decision that infuriated Trump and his allies.
We're getting a lot of incoming here, and we need you to answer some questions.
I'm sorry, the president is not going to be able to take over and win enough votes to eliminate that 7-point lead.
That naked truth reportedly sent Team Trump into an election night frenzy, lobbying Fox head Rupert Murdoch for a retraction. They didn't get one. And months later, the Fox News journalist in charge of making that call was let go. Fox said its decision to terminate Chris Steiwalt was part of a restructuring. Steiwalt says he was fired. Steiwalt went on to testify in front of the January 6th hearings, where he said a journalistic drive to be factual and first was the only thing that drove that consequential Arizona call.
By the time we found out how much everybody was freaking out and losing their minds over this call, we were already trying to call the next state.
That moment of hard facts from the former president's favorite propaganda network is surprising. But what does it say about the information environment that channels like Fox have created? And what could happen the next time there's a full-blown effort to obfuscate the results and there aren't enough Chris Steiwalts to push back? Steiwalt describes the propaganda plaguing cable news in his latest book, Broken News. I talked to him about that and about the pro-MAGA megaphone that is Fox News. Chris Steiwalt, formerly with Fox News, is here with me now in the studio. Chris, great to see you. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Well, Chris, you were, of course, right in your famous call, Arizona, election night 2020. But you've spoken about all of the murderous fury that you got as blowback from the public, probably from within inside Fox News too. And I want to talk about that. But what was the blowback and the fury like for you for that very accurate early call?
Well, a call can't be early if it's right. If once the polls are closed, you can make the call. And it wasn't my call. It was a great team. We had the best team at Fox News. And there was a time when the network was very proud to tout how good our team was and that we were the best in the business. The problem is that telling the truth to viewers during an election cycle, if their preferred team is losing, is not good for the bottom line. It doesn't help to tell people what's really going on if they're not going to like what they have to hear. And in the run-up to the election, the opinion show hosts and a lot of folks who were coming on Fox News were telling people that Donald Trump was going to win again. They were reinforcing Trump's narrative that the only way that he could lose would be by fraud, or if it was stolen from him. Joe Biden was doing way better. Donald Trump did about the same in 2020 as he did in 2016, but Joe Biden did way better than Hillary Clinton. And by not telling viewers that over the course of the election cycle, They were shocked when we swung the hammer and told them the truth. They were not prepared for it. They responded accordingly. And that is the fault of the network that did not prepare viewers appropriately to understand what was going to happen.
Intimidation or murderous fury or murderous rage, as you describe it, has a purpose when it's directed at election workers or elected officials or journalists too. It's not just to vent anger, it's to get you to do something different.
Right, it's terrorism. A big thing is political violence is a...
Well, hold on. Is it terrorism? Like, this is another word. I don't know if you've seen any of the legendary Pisco debates with Destiny about what is and isn't terrorism and using the word versus not using the word. But yeah, this is another thing that I think is... I'm if you're going to use the word terrorism, I think you have to do like a diatribe as to like, you know, not make yourself seem like you're just calling things you don't like terrorism, because there's a real tendency to do that. And I kind of think they're doing that here. I don't know if I would describe, you know, what like the worst, I don't know if I would describe what Tucker Carlson does as terrorism. Like that's, in fact, no, I do know that I wouldn't do that. That seems a really big stretch. Like maybe you could call it stochastic terrorism, right?
I got the impression that this guy might have like received a bunch of death threats or something, and maybe that's what he was talking about when he said terrorism.
Okay, yeah, maybe. Actually, I'm going to just rewind to see if I can
prepare viewers appropriately to understand what was going to happen.
Intimidation or murderous fury or murderous rage, as you describe it, has a purpose when it's directed at election workers or elected officials or journalists too. It's not just to vent anger, it's to get you to do something different.
Right, it's terrorism. A big thing.
Okay, he's talking about specifically about those things being directed at officials. That's a much more fair statement.
Yeah, and I think
I'd still be 100% on board with it, but it's definitely a lot better.
The way that it was phrased is kind of ambiguous about, like, is he talking about like random people intimidating workers, you know, poll workers, or is he talking about like Fox News people doing it? On the terrorism thing, I did a WIC panel about that one time, and I was mostly against the use of the word terrorism. I think it's mostly used just to, like, you know, morally load things that are you know, often better described with other terms, but
just like the 5 millionth word that's happened to that we have to go throw on the bonfire now.
I know, right? But no, I'm curious if you, like, because I haven't actually seen any of the like Destiny and Pisco debates about the word. Could you like fill me in real quick about like what?
Yeah, it's been a while, so I might be getting some of the details wrong. But essentially, Destiny did not want to call the January 6th rioters terrorists, and Pisco did. And it was a really, I really enjoyed Pisco and the way that he goes about describing things and his style of like argumentation. So it was just super, I thought it was super enjoyable to see them go back and forth on that stuff over and over and over again. And what I felt like both sides were making really strong arguments. Like, it felt like it was a very good debate where I was like, you know, I can kind of see where Destiny's coming from at this point, but at the same time, I mean, I think Pisco's dead on when he says, you know, well, if not these, then who? You know, so I thought it was, I don't know, I don't remember the specific line by line on any of the arguments, but I really enjoyed those debates going back and forth.
That sounds like a really interesting conversation. I will try to look that up later. Thanks.
Political violence became a credible threat, right? Donald Trump demonstrated that he could make political violence, real physical harm, a possibility. Every Republican politician who is thinking about, should I do the right thing? Should I tell the truth? Should I stand up for the Constitution and the American system? Should I stand up for this process? In the back of their minds, they're thinking about the fact that there are people who are willing to commit serious crimes and commit real violence. If you're a Republican lawmaker, most of them are just trying to keep their seats. But some of them have to think at a certain level, you know, how much does Liz Cheney have to think about the safety of herself and her family? How much do these other people have to think about it? January 6th was evidence that Trump was a credible threat, that his supporters could inflict violence on his behalf.
So talk a little
Talking about Liz Cheney there and the considerations, I think the other really interesting thing is, and this goes back to the discussion we were having earlier about staying in a system as a sane person versus saying, no, this has gone too far. That's what you got to wonder about. I mean, this is one of my little personal pet theories about Ben Shapiro, is that, he's just, hoping to steer the ship back towards sanity. Because, I mean, I really disagree with Ben Shapiro on a lot of things. But, man, I don't know if you've ever seen the clip of Ben Shapiro on 2020 election night with the Daily Wire cast. And I think it's like, I haven't seen the clip in a while, so I want to make sure I'm not like this is more of a paraphrase than an exact thing. But it's something like every other person is like, yeah, they're rigging the election. Election is on. Ben Shapiro's like, guys, we don't have any evidence for that. Maybe we should wait on that. Maybe we should wait. Everyone's like, yeah, whatever, Ben, whatever. Anyway, so they're still in the goddamn election, is what's going on here, ladies and gentlemen. And it's just like, man, I really gotta wonder what Ben Shapiro thinks of like these fucking crazies that he employs like on his Daily Wire thing. Because I really don't think Ben Shapiro is that bad of a guy. I mean, I strongly disagree with him. But Ben Shapiro feels like, oh, this is the kind of conservative person where it's like, I disagree politically, but we can agree to disagree. And then he's like standing next to Matt Walsh, who's like, yeah, women should go back to like the spaces that they belong. I don't think that women should be in masculine spaces. It's like, what the fuck? Holy shit.
Yeah, so whenever there is kind of like purity testing on the right, Ben Shapiro is one of those people who often fails to make the cut for the purest of the pure.
Yeah, and then you look at someone like Lindsey Graham or Mitch McConnell, and it's not even a question if these guys like Trump or not. I mean, it's why there's all these recordings of like, conservative leaders, before Trump got in, saying things like, yeah, Trump is a total fucking idiot. I think as Lindsey Graham says, if we elect Trump, we'll lose and we'll deserve to, and stuff. And, they're absolutely just waiting for the second that those Trump poll numbers go down and he's no longer has a stranglehold on the party to go back to business as usual.
Bit more about the expectation that Fox had set for its audience on that night versus the reality that you were reporting as an election analyst and a journalist. You talked about it a little bit, but talk a little bit more about the disconnect between the objective truth of the election on that night and the message that Fox's audience not only wanted to hear, but were prepared to believe if it didn't go their way.
So after Trump won in 2016, people said to me, and people like me, aha, you said Hillary Clinton was probably going to win, and Donald Trump won. Therefore, all of your hocus pocus and cracked chicken bones at the bottom of the pot are all illegitimated, and Trump will win. It doesn't matter what the poll says.
It's just like...
Just no nuance
people are just so
whatsoever.
foolish, dude. It's like it's literally like I'm playing D&D with a friend, and then friend's like, should I heal? Should I make an attack roll? Well, if I make an attack roll, I could kill him. It's like, dude, we know it's AC. We know what your bonus is. So in order to hit, you'd have to get a 19 or a 20. That's 1 in 10. That's a 10% chance versus the heal is guaranteed. So statistically speaking, it's way more likely to be better if you just heal. And they're like, no, I'm going to make the attack. They roll the attack, they get the 19 to hit. Oh, you were wrong. No! That's not how it works. That's it's just like, and it's just like, people have no appreciation for this stuff. Oh my gosh, it's just like everyone needs to go become a fan of LS in League of Legends. Because this is what he's talking about, man. It's results-based Andy. It's the kind of person who goes through life and is like, oh, I took a lottery ticket, I won, I guess we should all go buy lottery tickets because apparently that's a good idea now, right? Oh my gosh, it's so frustrating because there is no way to reach someone like that. Because it's just results based, right? So all you have to go off of is what happens, and that isn't always a good way to go to figure out why things happen or to analyze for the future, right? And oh my god, it's just very frustrating, And I would just encourage anyone out there who's falls into this pitfall, it's a very common, logical pitfall to fall into. We all fall into it. I fall into it as well. Especially in your personal life, you don't always have studies for things. Sometimes you have to go off of it. But when we're talking about really big, important things that we do have a lot of science for, don't be a dumbass. Okay, guys? All right, I know it's hard. It's hard for all of us, okay? But we can do better, okay? We can do it. I believe in it.
I think the antidote to that, to the extent that there is one, is like probabilistic thinking, right? And our brains are just not built to easily and intuitively do that. And so you were saying there's no way to reach these, people who think that way. I don't quite think it's true that there's no way to do it, but I think there's no efficient way to do it, right? Because it takes like lots and lots and lots of practice to think about these things that way, and no matter how good you get at it, you will still often fail at it. But yeah.
The news division shows at Fox, or what we used to call the news division, shows like Fox News Sunday and Special Report and others, offered a realistic perspective of the election, which is that it would have been much harder for Donald Trump to beat Joe Biden than it would have Hillary Clinton. I don't know whether Trump was trying to steal the election, whether he was laying down a predicate to steal the election at the time by talking about fraud and discouraging people from voting, or if he actually believes that stuff. But psychoanalyzing Donald Trump is a loser's bargain.
Chris, you testified in front of the January 6th committee about how election night was going to go in terms of tabulating the votes. I want you to take a listen to Steve Bannon here talking to some supporters way back on October 31st of 2020.
The Democrats, more of our people vote early that count. Theirs voted mail. And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. So when you wake up Wednesday morning, it's going to be a firestorm. And Trump's going to be sitting there mocking, tweeting shit out. You lose. I'm the winner. I'm the king. Also, if Trump is losing by 10 or 11 o'clock at night, it's going to be even crazier. No, because he's going to sit right there and say they stole it.
Agree.
I'm directing the Attorney General to shut down all ballot places in all 50 states. It's going to be no. He's not going out easy. If Biden's winning, Trump is going to do some crazy shit.
I want to get your reaction to what Steve Bannon is describing there, because he seems to know exactly.
Very normal thing for one of the top political strategists in the Republican Party, someone who is personally talking to the Republican president, to do. Very normal. Both sides have problems with political radicalization, guys, and there's nowhere to point the fingers.
Exactly how election night and the false claims of victory from Donald Trump are going to go.
Well, I mean, the thing about Trump and what makes the whole thing so disconcerting for the health of the Republic is he did it in the open, right? This stuff happened openly. We all knew what they were going to try to do. As we were getting ready for the elections, we knew that Trump would assert victory. It was in the paper. And Donald Trump, with all, not with all, but with many of the greatest crimes that you have seen in political history, Trump just does this one right out in front. You see it laying out, and he's working his way up to it. He's laying down the predicate with his supporters. Some of them probably believed him. Some of them, I think, like Bannon, were cynical and played along, like, oh, this will be that this was a gambit, that they didn't believe it. But the people I really feel the worst for are the people who believed it, the people who were duped and fell for it. What was shocking to me were the number of what I thought were normal Republicans in Congress, particularly, who went along with this sort of self-coup that Trump was trying to engage in. When I saw Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise sign on to the effort to steal Pennsylvania's electoral votes, I thought, where are we now? And I assume, again, that they did this stuff because they knew it wouldn't work and they wanted to placate Trump and please him. But that was the scary moment for me when I saw how many in the Republican Party were willing to play along for their own personal advancement.
Chris Stirewalt, author of Broken News, formerly of the Fox Decision Desk, famously Arizona on election night 2020. Chris, thanks so much.
You bet.
That does it for this edition of Breaking the Vote. When we're back, Hungary's Viktor Orban pays a visit to America and continues his authoritarian love affair.
Okay, we have to stop here. I'm gonna lose it. I cannot believe this shit, dude. This whole news media cycle was so. It's just like conservative people need to become conservative again, because they don't. It feels like a lot of conservative people don't even believe in anything anymore. They're just like, it's like, oh, why is Viktor Orban good? Oh, well, because, he owns the libs. And it's like, Viktor Orban is, talking about, he's literally, the, avatar of, the corruption of, big bureaucracy of, EU grants and, money and, pork barrel spending that conservatives used to rally against, with Viktor Orban's childhood friend is now the richest construction guy in Hungary because his construction company just happens to get all the fucking grants for government construction that are massively overpriced compared to what competitors are offering, by the way. And it's just it's
honestly,
why did they have to lie? It just goes back to 9/11. It always goes back to 9/11. It just goes back to 9/11. George Bush could have convinced Americans to do anything. Imagine you had the power to get Americans to agree on anything. Holy shit. And he tried to invade Iraq. What a fucking waste, man. Oh my god. Imagine if he had been like, and that's why we're going to do zoning reform. Like, the world would be like 5 times. Like, I understand it's harder to sell. Okay? But you could have done anything, dude.
You could have done that as part of a larger package, right?
And then you don't even invade Iraq good. You don't even do it good, man. Like, you fuck it up completely in the execution. Like, I actually think that there's a way to justify the Iraq invasion, right? I mean, number one, you don't lie about it. You just say, wow, Saddam Hussein's fucking evil. And if we can make an evil country not evil, that seems like a good thing, right? That's number one. But then in terms of the actual invasion and management, oh, I know. It's a great idea. Let's just banish everyone who is part of the government with any skill in managing bureaucracy. Amazing idea. Boom! Huge, great. Oh my, anyway, so... Guys, thanks for watching. This has been, just an amazing show here by Vice News.
Thanks for joining our propaganda broadcast about their propaganda broadcast about other people's propaganda broadcasts. Yeah. Yeah, like to what you were saying a minute ago, like I think these last few years of politics have kind of black-pilled me on people having almost any real political ideals at all. Like I kind of think they just want to join a team, and then they just adopt the ideals of that team as a
there's
form
such
of
a good video we should watch sometime. It's really short, but this just reminds me of the J.J. McCullough conservatism video.
Oh, you mentioned that to me before. I remember.
Yeah, it's right here. I'm just gonna put this in a link somewhere for us to watch sometime. It's different than the one I want us to watch next time, but this is a really good.
Okay.
Yeah, this one is really good. Anyways, but yeah, anyways, you were saying.
Oh yeah. So I was saying that, like, I think a lot of the kind of political ideals and ideology that people espouse really are there to justify their membership on a certain part of the political spectrum. People present it as if I'm on this part of the political spectrum because of the ideals, but really I think it's the other way around. I think I've adopted the ideals in order to justify my place on the political spectrum.
It certainly feels like it's becoming a bigger and bigger part of the pie chart as to why you believe what you believe.
Yeah. Well, you got anything else? You want to shout yourself out or anything?
Go vote, guys. It's really important to go vote.
Oh, yes, thank you. Election day is, I believe, next Tuesday, if I recall. So, yeah.
Yeah, and if you can get a vote-in ballot, get a vote-in ballot. If you can go register. But yeah, get out and vote, folks. Because you know what? It is impossible. I'm just going to do my little spiel here right now.
Mm-hmm.
In a liberal democracy, your vote has huge signaling power. It is actually impossible to waste your vote in a liberal democracy because people are always going to look at that vote as an evaluation of the political landscape. A great example would be Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders lost both primaries, but we all know he's had a massive effect on politics. And not just him, but the fact that he got all those votes. Despite the fact that he lost twice, Bernie Sanders had a massive effect on politics, what people thought was okay to push for. He's moved the Overton window very to the left, especially in the primaries. Look at the difference. For example, a lot of people in the 2020 primary were really on the Bernie train that you wouldn't expect previously. So your vote always mattered, especially at the local level, by the way, where no one's fucking voted, okay? At the local level, it is going to be things like, oh, and this vote was decided by 107, by a difference of 170. That's huge power, just waiting there to be grabbed. And if you want even more power, get involved with your city council, get involved with door knocking. These are other ways where you can be getting the power of like 100 people's votes. So if you want to make the world a better place, if you think that the world's going in the wrong direction, then change is possible. So I encourage you to get out there, go knock some doors, go sign up to volunteer for something somewhere, and get involved, because it will make you feel better and will make the world better.
Right. Thank you very much. Very well said. And this is Flowtrace. He's got, you've got some social media and stuff. Do you want to show?
Yes, I'm twitch.tv/Flowtrace and twitter.com/Flowtrace. I no longer have the underscore because the Flowtrace @ was available, so I snatched it up.
Nice.
And yeah, so I'm currently working on getting a streaming set up so I can actually start streaming myself soon, hopefully within the month or so. And yeah, you can catch me here on most Wednesdays, and I'm in and around the Twitch politics space on panels.
And you're always a wonderful person to have conversations with, so thank you for joining me.
You too, Cricket. Thank you very much.
Right. See you later.